So can you please briefly introduce who you are and what you do here at the university?
Okay, I'm Dr. Carol Wagstaff and I'm an Associate Professor in Crop Quality for Health.
Mm-hmm. So how did you get to have this job? What kind of training route and different career paths have you taken to get here?
Well, I'd love to say it was planned, but that really wouldn't be telling the truth. I did a PhD at the University of York, which followed a first degree in biological sciences, which was at Royal Holloway, University of London. And about halfway through my PhD, I remember looking at my supervisor's job and thinking, that's a pretty good job. I think I quite fancy that myself. But then it was a very long route from that stage, and I certainly wouldn't have predicted that I would have ended up in a department of food and nutritional sciences. So my PhD is actually on the way that plants respond to gravity. Pretty esoteric, and it really was a collection of different techniques. So I did bits of molecular biology, bits of genetics, bits of physiology, some microscopy, and so on, and used that really as a stepping off point. And I'd always been interested in post-harvest quality of particularly horticultural crops. So I kind of had an interest in that area. But post-PhD, I decided that I really wasn't so sure about the academic world, and I definitely wasn't sure about molecular biology and genetics. So I jumped ship for 6 months and worked for an organisation called ADAS, which is the Agronomic Development and Advisory Service, based out in Herefordshire, where I was a crop physiologist, which essentially meant analysing field trials for new varieties of cereal crops, for testing new fertilisers and pesticides and so on. And then I decided that actually the science wasn't as rigorous there as I would have liked, so I ran back into academia and have never left since. I spent 5 years as a postdoc working on cut flowers out of Cardiff University and a little bit back at Royal Holloway. And then I moved into working on salad crops. Same problem, you cut a plant off from its roots and you try and make it live. So that was 2.5 years of postdoc, and then I finally got the job at Reading.
Oh, perfect. So given that your career path has been quite varied, how do you think your PhD has helped that?
I think the PhD, although the subject was very esoteric, it was a good training ground in that I strategically chose one that had lots of different techniques associated with it. I think some people really know what they want to do, they're interested in a particular thing, and they pursue that, and that's where they stay in their academic field. For those of us that were less certain that just like science, then choosing something that gives you lots of options afterwards has been useful. And a PhD is an absolute requirement for being an academic, so you do need one. I think these days it's extremely rare to go from PhD to academic position without a fairly substantial period of postdoc research. And that's certainly true in my case. I did about 7.5 years of postdoc research. I'd say moving around a little bit, but gradually focusing on where I found my interest to lie. And that's how I got the job at Reading. It wasn't advertised as a job for someone like me, it was advertised as a human nutritionist. But I happened to ring up the head of department at the time and explain what I could do, and it turned out that the university had just invested in a food chain and health theme, which was cross-cutting across the whole university. So I dropped very nicely into that, and so they ended up appointing me.
So going back briefly to the period at ADAS, would you think that your PhD helped there as well? So for someone thinking of maybe going to industry as opposed to academia?
I think ADAS wanted the PhD. They were certainly, I was at the time when I was working there, I was in between finishing the formal part of the funded PhD and actually submitting it. I took nearly 6 months after the funding ran out to submit the PhD, so I submitted in 3.5 years. Yeah, it was necessary, and the whole process of a PhD is about training you to become a more independent researcher, and that's what organisations like ADAS and many others are actually looking for, that they see the PhD as a training ground for a whole range of skills, and almost the subject of the PhD is of secondary importance. They want to see that you can pick up new techniques, that you can work independently, and that you can work as part of a team, that you can interpret your results, that you can critically evaluate, that you can start to stitch what you found out into the context of the rest of your team, or in fact the broader research community.
So, the million-dollar question, what does an academic do all day? What are the different roles and jobs that you have?
It's changed considerably during the 8 years that I've been at Reading. When I I started, the teaching had a bigger focus. Teaching, I find, is something that's hugely enjoyable. I really enjoy the front of house stuff, where you're actually there interacting with students, giving lectures and so on. And the feedback is very quick. You know the instant you've given that lecture whether it's worked, and so the rewards are very instant. Research itself takes much longer in order to find out whether it's really going in the right direction. These days I'm probably more of a project manager. The team has grown to 14 people at present, made up of a number of PhD students, technicians, postdocs, and so on. And each of those people is doing a different job. So it's really project management. And that's something I really enjoy. And I enjoy the diversity of projects that I have going on in the group, rather than being just completely attached to one project as I was as a postdoc. Apart from that, then there's the backroom stuff associated with teaching and being an academic, which seems to involve an awful lot of administration, not just the marking, but doing things like workload models for modules, student feedback, a whole range of other administrative burdens might be too strong a word, but sometimes it feels like that. Lots of exam questions, queries on exam questions, queries on the indicative answers to exam questions, and so on. I sit on board of studies, I sit on the teaching and learning committee, and then beyond that I interact in the wider university in the Centre for Food Security, and I'm about to become director of the Advanced Training Partnership, which is quite a big operation on campus to deliver master's level training for people actually based in the food industry. And I would say, unlike many academics, I spend an extraordinary amount of time in my car driving to places. Most of the grants that we have funded in the lab have got an industry component to them. And so I spend a large part of my time either looking after those connections and servicing those grants, or touting for new money, and so on. And because of the nature of the funding, we often end up going up to London or to Swindon for events organised by the Funding Council, where you're required to feed back to them how the grants are going, and to feed forward to people who might be wanting to apply to similar funding avenues in the future. So there's a lot of travel involved, but personally I don't feel that you can beat face-to-face contact, and that an email just doesn't quite cut it on many occasions.
So given the varied role that you have, what would you say are some of the best aspects and some of the worst aspects of your job?
Okay. The best thing about it, I think, and the thing I spotted in my PhD supervisor, is the complete flexibility. So long as I deliver happy PhD students who complete on time, students that like my lectures and produce the things that I have to do, the exam questions and the marking and things on time, so long as I write papers and I bring in grant funding, people don't really care whether I do it in the middle of the night, early in the morning, and I can have another life outside of academia if I want to. It is absolutely not a 9-to-5 job, and that, to me, is one of the best things about it. I describe it a bit like running your own business, but with the security of a paycheck every month, in that I'm free to do more or less what I want and to organise my time as I wish, but I will always get paid. The downside is almost a direct consequence of that, in that you never clear your desk, you never finish the job, you never go home at night having done everything, and I find I never quite leave the job. I'm always thinking about something, doing something towards it, because to me it's not really work, it's a way of life, and that's why I've got into it. The pay isn't great, but the pension scheme's brilliant, so you don't do it for sort of the material rewards, you do it for the intellectual pleasure and the feeling that you're making a difference. I think one of the great things about this career is that you have an opportunity to influence an awful lot of other people's careers, that every undergraduate, master's student, PhD student that you touch can go on and do amazing things with their lives. And if you've contributed in some small way, then that for me has bigger knock-on consequences than if I was working for one particular business, one particular defined job.
So thinking about students who may be considering doing a PhD, as you're a PhD supervisor and have seen lots of applications and interviewed potential candidates, what advice could you offer for these students? How can they stand out in their kind of application and interview process?
For me, the qualities I look for in a PhD student have to be a curiosity about the world, and a desire to ask questions, and a desire to solve your own problems. Quite often I find it's not the academically most brilliant students are the ones that I want to have in my lab. I want to have people that enjoy the practical side of things, that some people are motivated by the techniques and by the fancy science that they might do. Other people are motivated more by the fundamental biological questions. And there's a place for both sorts of people within the group. To make yourself stand out, then, if you've got some evidence of wanting to go down the research group route beforehand, whether you've maybe volunteered as an intern, that you've taken a final year project or something that involves connections with industry, if that's something that you want to pursue, that you've tried to engage with the research community above and beyond just the normal undergraduate academic programme, would be something that would make a real difference to me. But the key question in the interview is, why do you want to do a PhD? And generally speaking, if the answer comes back because I think it's going to get me a better job and earn more money, that probably isn't the person I want in my lab. I want someone that is just genuinely interested in the science and finding out stuff and making a contribution to the world.
So is there anything they can do to enhance their application before they apply? So you said internships. Is there anything else that would help in terms of pre-work they could do?
Research your PhD, change your CV in order to tailor it to the application in question, and particularly the covering letter. So you quite often get applications that say, here's my CV, and that doesn't go down nearly so well as an application that says, here's my CV, and these are my understandings of the requirements of this particular PhD project, and this is what I can bring to the project. A lot of applications are quite retrospective, talking about what the student has done in the past, which is fine, but I also want to know what that student can bring to my research group, what they can add to it. So if they've shown themselves to be good communicators, whether it's through doing outreach events at school, something like that, or as an undergraduate, they've shown themselves to be a team player, that's an advantage. Certainly the internship type of thing is something that I think would be hugely beneficial, something we don't do very much in the UK, but is absolutely commonplace in the States, that undergraduate students will work voluntarily in research groups, doing technician type roles, when they can fit it in and around their lectures, just to get experience about what it's like to be in a research group. And that's why if I have master's students or undergraduate students, I always embed them within the group, and they come to the lab meetings and they hear what it's like to really do science, the problems associated with it, where you have to go back and do it again, where you have to change your ideas, modify your hypotheses, and actually find out what it's like to do science on the ground, and then decide if that's what you want to do for yourself from a position of knowledge rather than guesswork.